Assalamu alaikum everyone, and I would like to thank you for coming for the session. I would like to introduce you the speaker. I think he does not need any introduction because the majority is from ELCY and most of you know him very well. I had a long introduction for him. Dr. Junifer Abatayo is the chairman of the Language Assessment, Testing and Development Unit at the English Language Center Yanbu. He also serves as the Secretary of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia Association of Language Teachers Yanbu. He has presented papers and conducted workshops to both national and international conferences such as TESOL Arabia, TESOL Asia, Qatar TESOL, PALT, JALT, KSAALT. His most recent publication is on the use of discourse markers in lectures, its effect on academic listening comprehension. As part of his professional development, Dr. Abatayo participated in and successfully completed a workshop to become a site reviewer for the Commission on English Language Program Accreditation, Virginia, USA. Dr. Abatayo is recipient of 2014 Conference Scholarship of the British Council Middle East. So he has illustrious record. I would like to hand you over to the speaker, Dr. Junifer Abatayo.
Thank you, Dr. Rafi. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you for coming. And I actually expect for 10 people for today's session. So I'll be giving you my handouts later after my presentation. So the title of the core of my presentation is on two different types of assessment: authentic assessment and versus performance assessment, a tale of two scales. So I'm giving myself for like 35 to 40-minute presentation. I'll be giving you very good information about what is the real meaning of authentic assessment and how does it differ from performance assessment. And aside from that, one major objective, very important objective of my presentation today is for us to have better understanding of our assessment practices in the classroom, as to whether our assessment practices given to the students are this traditional, what are this authentic, and what are this performance assessment. Like what I said earlier, I'll be talking for important core of the presentation that has to do with assessment, the protocols of assessment. I'll be talking about the practices. What are these practices that are considered very important, especially that we are in an EFL environment? What are these principles behind the development and implementation of these assessment practices? What are the washback? Let me talk very briefly about the washback. And originally, the washback has to do with the negative effects of this assessment implementation, but nowadays, washback has to do with the positive effects and the negative effects. And what are our future directions after learning all of these very important information about these two types of assessment? We need to understand how these should be developed and implemented in our curriculum. Okay, I had a lot of encounters or experiences with teachers talking about assessment. What is assessment? And to them, they said that assessment has to do with marks, grades, weighting structure, and how are these marks distributed to translate or to interpret the performances of our students. But the real meaning of assessment is when we support students' learning, how to support our students. That's the very core of assessment. When we support our students, of course, we need to measure their performance. We need to say there is a need for us to understand the students' total performance inside a classroom, determining what they can do and what they can't do. Example, in testing, for example, in testing, sometimes we are very much aware of our role and our responsibilities as teachers. We just face our computers and type, develop structures, our test items or test questions without considering the classification of the types or the natures of our question. Sometimes, and most of the time, we fail to match correctly the classification of these questions to the objectives of the instructional objectives. And this is what I call as learning validity. When you say learning validity, there is an equal the curricular objectives, instructional objectives, the way we write our examinations, and the feedback for our students. Now, let me share with you the assessment practices that we are doing in ALCY. I'm not saying that our practices are perfect because there is no single or best assessment measure or practice. So it depends on how we contextualize our very own setting and how we cater to the needs of our students, how we structure or implement these assessment practices. Assessment of learning that is summative, assessment for learning is formative, is where the teacher and the student talk about their performances, and assessment as learning, wherein the student role is the focus. I would like to talk about briefly also about the assessment in the Arabian Gulf. Most of the researches published about the assessment practices in the Arabian Gulf says that the school system encourages rote learning. And I'm not sure, I'm not saying that in our very own setting, we are also doing this rote learning. You are the teacher, and I think you are very much familiar with our students' performances in the class as to what types of tests that we are giving them, whether it's traditional, whether it's authentic or performance. Sometimes teachers are having this a different interpretation or understanding of what is authentic. They are saying that I did have this authentic test and performance type of assessment for my students, but their understanding of authentic is actually different. When they mean authentic, that means that they are just doing it actual testing. But what is really the meaning of authentic assessment? Then I will talk about it. Example, in Abu Dhabi, in the year 1997, there is a general assessment of the students about, it covers everything, assessment practices, students' performances, and what are these assessment principles. And in Abu Dhabi, the result says that students learn by rote. So it has to do with memory. And it also have the same effect and situation in Egypt. They also have their own challenges and reforms. In Egypt, has embarked on a standards-based approach to educational reform that provides a rational foundation for curriculum and a consistent approach to assessment. Thus, a new assessment system has to develop concurrently with the curriculum and assessment standards. Meaning to say, this calls for a correct and ideal matching of our curriculum objectives. Teaching is in the classroom, testing, and the giving of feedback for the students. Let's move on to Oman. In Oman also, teaching and examinations are based on memorization. You see, it's very consistent in Oman, in Egypt, in Abu Dhabi, and students in Oman memorize the textbook content for their exam purposes. How about in Saudi Arabia? Higher education in Saudi Arabia. What are the achievements, the challenges, and the opportunities? In the year 2010, Darandari concluded that in practice, the vision for assessment is neither clear nor holistic, and that theories for student assessment and learning are not integrated and not well connected at all institutional levels. So this is not my investigation. This is the result of in higher education, and to support that finding or that claim, even the NCAAA, the National Commission for Academic Accreditation and Assessment, calls for this alternative assessment. Alternative, meaning to say it does not call for testing. It does not call for paper-based. This means that we have an option to come up with this authentic and performance assessment. And in most tertiary institutions in the kingdom, they rely solely on students' mark and international benchmark tests. Meaning to say that students have the chance or opportunities to join or to study in a university if they can provide their proficiency result of this IELTS and TOEFL. However, a high score on TOEFL exam is not a good predictor of academic success. And ETS, or the Educational Testing Service, responsible for the development of TOEFL and IELTS, mentioned, and they strongly recommend that in the determining students' readiness for baccalaureate study, bachelor degrees, such decisions should never be based on TOEFL scores alone. Meaning to say, like what I said earlier, I mentioned about alternative assessment. There are a number of components and dimensions wherein we can have a lot of chances to determine and measure real skills and abilities of our students. Now, what are these authentic and performance assessment? Okay, let us have just this very quick fix about authentic and performance assessment, and I wanted to share your personal understanding of these types of assessment. Authentic assessment is synonymous with performance assessment. True or false?
False.
False. Okay, I will give I would like to provide you the feedback later about these very brief statements. All authentic assessments are performance assessments.
Yes. Yes.
Is it correct?
Yes.
True or false?
Yes.
Some say true and others are saying it's false. Performance-based tasks may not necessarily be authentic.
True.
Okay, thank you for your answers. A student identifies the parts of the microscope in an authentic is an example of authentic assessment.
True. Identify the parts of the microscope in the depends. It's a
True,
performance.
false, and some said it depends. Okay, you see, this is what I mean earlier. Some teachers believe that the activity is authentic. For example, I am teaching I am in a mechanical department, engineering department, because I'm using the microscope, teaching the students, then I would believe that my activity is a kind of an authentic one because it has to do with the course, it has to do with the subject. But what are the components or the factors that determine authenticity? Factors determine authenticity of an assessment. There are three important things. The first one is the task itself. That task should be contextualized, it is contextualized, and that there should be evaluation criteria. There should be evaluation criteria, and later I will share, my program coordinator is here, and he's very much aware of how we develop and create a new structure of coming up with authentic. And we don't have that much of the performance assessment for per-year program, but I believe we have started with the authentic assessment. In authentic assessment, the key requirement is students should demonstrate that they're able to complete a particular task or task that resembles something that they are likely to have to do in the target situation. And I also believe that, so excuse me, what department you are in? Department?
Yes. Science and
Computer science? Computer. I want to ask about a very specific task that you give to your students. Do you have this kind of assessment wherein you will ask your students to identify the parts of the computer? You have that? You have that. What do you think is this kind of a situation? Is it authentic or performance? In your very own understanding. Anyway, we will be sharing our
performance.
Is it performance? Because you ask the students to identify the parts of the computer. Performance, asking the students to identify the parts of the computer. Okay, I would like to give you a very specific example. I am teaching the students how to use the microscope. I will ask the students identify the microscope. If the students are able to identify the types or the parts of the microscope, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, then to me, it has nothing to do with performance assessment because it has to do with identification and labeling the parts. But if you will ask your students to use or to mention, to demonstrate their understanding of the function of each part, then that becomes authentic. Am I right? Okay, that becomes authentic because in here, Wiggins mentioned that these three factors determine authenticity of the task. The task itself, it should be contextualized. What is the context of the task? And the evaluation criteria. Okay, another information is that in authentic assessment, this requires the presentation of worthwhile or meaningful tasks that are designed to be representative of performance in the field. The example given here is about the lifeguards, that they should demonstrate that they can actually rescue somebody from the water or sea. Memorizing the task on how to rescue a person from the water or the sea is not an example of an authentic assessment. But if they can demonstrate how to save or how to rescue somebody, then that becomes authentic for performance assessment. Additional concepts of authentic instruction and assessment. I highlighted number 3 because in authentic instruction, connectedness to the world is a must. It's very important. Problems, topics which occur in the larger society or world. Meaning to say that students should be able, or students should be given the chance to perform or to demonstrate their understanding to the world. What are these types of activities or assessment practice that you think that fits into the context of our very own setting? In academic writing 301, we are used to just copy questions, essay questions, comparison and contrast, cause and effect, and descriptive writing. And these questions have nothing to do with students' demonstration of understanding, contextualized in their very own setting. So what we are trying to, what we have tried and implemented is that we contextualized the type of questions in the examinations because it's very important that there is a connection, the students themselves and in their very own or present situation. In my case, when I was younger, when I was a student, we're given a reading passage and the test is about reading comprehension. And the passage talks about red desert storm, something like that. To me, I find it very difficult to demonstrate my understanding because I don't have any idea of what is this red desert storm. But if you will ask the students, if you will give them a reading passage or activities in your case that have to do with their current situation, contextualized, then this connectedness to the world occurs. So that could develop their understanding, and you as teachers, you also have the chance to come up with this authentic type of assessment. Authentic assessment has to do with the representation of higher cognitive skills. It is true that our students, for example, the level of our students' English is very low, but that is not the reason why we can't devise authentic and performance evaluation, performance assessment. In here, when you say authentic assessment, the behavior, all these behavior should represent higher cognitive skills. And what are these? There should be evaluation. Students should learn how to evaluate. Students should know how to characterize, characterization, naturalization, and other things. In Bloom's taxonomy, originally it started with the very basic level, which is knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, and synthesis. But this time, we need to have this characterization, which is the affective domain. In our 001 examination, we were able to implement this new type of assessment wherein students are given the chance to show their affective understanding of the matter. Like, for example, what do you think? How do you feel? Or if you are in a situation, would you do the same thing? So this brings the students into a very contextualized situation, and this calls for this type of behavior, which represent higher cognitive skills, characterization and naturalization. In your case, or for the computer department, if you will ask the students to identify and perform, demonstrate their understanding of the uses of the parts of the microscope or computer, then this is what we call as naturalization. They are demonstrating their understanding of the task. Let me give you a comparison between traditional and authentic assessment in terms of construct validity, content validity, scoring, and consequential. For construct validity, in a traditional assessment, it is like recall, recognition, and compared to authentic, it has to do with construction and application. if you give our students a type of an assessment or a test that would asking the students to just list down, enumerate, identify, then that's traditional type of assessment in terms of construct validity. But in here, in authentic, if your task is authentic, then that is genuine and direct. Genuine, it is direct because it is contextualized in our very own setting. Example, content validity. In testing, when you say content validity, we need to make sure that the content is having an equal match of the objectives in the curriculum and in the syllabus. In traditional assessment, content validity is lower, it is short, discrete, and kind of summative. Summative because we are evaluating our students, we are assessing our students. This summative evaluation is judgmental. Judgmental because we categorize, we evaluate, we interpret the student's performance based on the numbers. But for authentic assessment, it has to do with formative. It is integrated skills, performing tasks. It is time consuming. Like if you give them multiple choice type of tests, it's very easy for them to accomplish. But in terms of content validity, authentic assessment is time consuming. And it assesses the whole construct, the processes involved in that particular task. Scoring validity. Scoring validity is one characteristic of a good test. If you find the marking of your examination easy, it's comfortable, then we need to believe that your examination is good, that your examination is okay. If you find the scoring of your examination very complicated, very difficult, then that means it could be that the examination or the test is not valid. In traditional assessment, example, scoring validity, I would like to talk about this automated scoring, for example. But in here, authentic assessment should be human raters. I'm very careful when I share information about human raters, inter-rater and inter-rater reliability. Because to me, when you come up with evaluation criteria, which is one factor that determines authenticity, one factor that determines authentic assessment for the students. When you come up with this evaluation criteria, sometimes one washback is that if the teachers are not well trained, if we are not very familiar with how to design this type of assessment and how to do the rating, then definitely the result will be not valid. So this human raters calls for teacher moderation, and in the case of that, if we are using rubric, then we need to calibrate our rubric. Consequential validity. What do you mean by consequential validity? Do you have any idea what is this consequential? What is this consequential validity?
Refers to the
What is the
results
results
of
of-
such tests.
Yeah, it has to do with results. Consequential has to do with predictive validity, like the future predictor of success of our, for example, our tests and results of examinations.
Positive and negative effects of this one.
Yeah, because in here, for authentic assessment, because you have all the time and the opportunities to talk with your students, you can monitor their progress, then the washback here, or the effect is always positive because you are giving them feedback on what they're doing. If it is not good, then you tell them it's not good and you need to develop, you ask the students to come up with other things in order for them to submit the needed requirement. For consequential validity, under traditional assessment, the emphasis is only on passing the test. You pass the test, but in authentic assessment, the emphasis is okay. The emphasis is on completing the test, regardless whether the test is whether you will consider it excellent, average, poor, or needs improvement, but at least you need to have this emphasis, which is students are required to complete the test. So that's one major difference between traditional assessment compared to authentic assessment in terms of consequential validity. Do you have questions about the comparison? Who has a question?
Is it always negative washback for the traditional one?
For the traditional, no, because it depends on the task itself. But asking what are these types of negative effects in terms of washback? For example, multiple choice. If you will give your students multiple choice, I had a chance to proctor a final examination, and from part A, B, and C, the students were asked to identify, enumerate, and list down. So these are examples of traditional type of assessment, because it only caters to the basic or the lower level, which is just like remembering, recalling, simple recall, and fill in the blanks. But if, like what I said, if you will just ask your students to perform, to demonstrate your understanding of a specific task, then that would be authentic assessment. But make sure when you do authentic assessment, there should be a very specific and a clear criteria for evaluation. In this case, you will make use of your rubric. When you write or when you develop your rubric, make sure that the criteria also reflect the task and other requirements required by the teacher.
We cannot make rubric for the multiple choice questions.
You can make rubric, because rubric is used for performance assessment.
Yeah.
That is why multiple choice type of test is an example of a traditional assessment.
So it's like,
I only have 10 minutes left.
so it's what?
Sorry, it's not working.
You can use the keyboard.
Yes, Mr. Hassan.
So the kind of assessment that we have for this 301 and 302,
Yeah.
that is authentic.
Authentic assessment.
And the one which we have for 000, 001, 002 is more or less like traditional assessment.
Yeah, it's a kind of a combination, but now the program coordinator is here, and he knows this very well, that we are implementing a new system or an assessment protocol, like especially the writing component of our examination. You remember that? That in our writing component, it's not only very basic, asking the students to write down their very own understanding of the passage itself, and aside from that, we are also asked them to contribute in terms of their affective domain, okay? Like their own attitudes, perception, and feelings regarding a very specific task.
So, but don't you think it's a bit difficult to make authentic assessment for technical English? Because you know, it's like when you are assessing the attitude of students, as I mean, in academic English, you can ask for like this kind of thing, this kind of performance. But you know, when it comes to technical kind of thing, things are a bit restricted, things are a bit tight compartments. So
It's difficult. That's a very good question. That is why in technical English, example 000, in our case, we are talking about the 3 levels of the students, 000, 001, and 002. Instead of asking the students to attend to these types of traditional multiple choice, true or false, simple recall, identification, enumeration, and fill in the blanks, we ask them to demonstrate or to perform something in the class. We have a topic like how to fix a broken car. We will ask them to demonstrate in the classroom. When demonstrate, then there should be a very specific evaluation criteria for this kind of performance or task. So that becomes a performance assessment.
So performance test cannot be discarded, outright.
Yeah,
It is
yes,
there.
yes,
It is
definitely,
there. We
definitely.
need performance test also.
If you develop a performance assessment, like what I said earlier, there should be a specific evaluation criteria, or else the task itself is invalid. It's also unfair for our students asking them to demonstrate or to perform something, and then as teachers who are not well trained and we are not really prepared to evaluate their own performance, and this particular performance is matched to these criteria, then it is a failure. You will fail as a teacher, and the test itself is not valid. Yes, Mr.
So
Hassan.
look, the thing is, in prep year we have the presentational stuff, but scoring is just a 5% in the whole scoring level. So we understand that there is a hurdle, and this is a real performance or student should. So what are the basic hurdles, why the assessment chairman of the committee, what are the basic hurdles you find to have a shift from that sort of traditional to the authentic one? Because we see that in the authentic and performance-based is a real thing. So why
Yeah,
we are
it's
not
the
going?
real- the
Why
real.
we are not heading towards it, and why it's taking time so in that level?
Well, actually, Mr. Coordinator would like to say something about that.
No, we are trying to. This semester, you know, the step thing is kind of push things back, but our intention. I talked to Dr. Abatayo, our intention is to increase like the performance
In the class, yeah.
type of activities assessment.
Just the presentation is there. In my sense, with this prep year, we have only 5% or I think 10% to some courses to present or presentation or speaking test like a thing.
Yeah.
The rest all is 95 to 90% is a traditional one.
Okay, since you mentioned about the speaking test, for example, how will you write a speaking prompt that can be considered authentic assessment?
Yeah, we have a rubric for this. Okay, so on the basis of rubric, we assign the task and students has to perform in the class. So we
Yeah.
have a clear.
The speaking prompt should also be about the course,
Yeah.
right? Because if you will just copy examples of speaking prompt and then you will ask your students to speak or to give their information about the topic, then it's not authentic anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so like what I said, we need to focus only this assessment based on the three factors that determine authenticity of the task. The task itself, the context, and evaluation criteria. Without the evaluation criteria, for example, for performance assessment without the rubric, then it's still invalid.
So the test varies from context to context.
Yeah, definitely.
And from subject to subject also.
Yeah.
Because in history subject, we only need performance tests because we need to recall facts. There we cannot apply authentic one.
Okay, sorry, recalling facts is not a performance type of assessment.
Kind of performance.
Yeah, it is just like traditional, if you will ask them to just memorize and then asking them to recall. But
That's
if you,
also performance.
yeah, if you will ask them to demonstrate their understanding when they recall, when they enumerate things, then that is, yes, that becomes already performance type of an activity.
So, doctor, so the doctor said, you know, it's more or less the same kind. There are things that, there are two kinds of assessment. So like one is like how much have you retained and how much have you digested.
Yes,
So
definitely.
the one which you're talking about, the first one, the performance one, it's about retention. The second one is digestion.
Yeah, if you speak about retention, the question now is to what extent or what is the degree or level of retention that you are talking about. That is why we need to clarify all of these things. There should be an evaluation criteria, right? So it's not just like basic things like retention or recalling of topics. Ask the students to demonstrate their understanding. Asking them to demonstrate their understanding of the task, then this evaluation criteria should be matched to the task prepared for our students. Okay? Now, this authentic assessment should be dynamic and responsive. That is why we need to have the emphasis of authentic assessment, or I must say performance assessment is about the task itself. How the students could achieve or complete the task directed by the teacher. Okay, how about performance assessment? Do you think performance is different from authentic assessment? The performance assessment, this has to do with what you do with what you know. Okay, students, they have understanding, and then ask them to perform or demonstrate that understanding. This refers to the performance assessment measures what students can do with what they know rather than how much they know. Example, in our case for English, we have this vocabulary test, vocabulary exam. We will just ask the students to read sentences and select or choose the correct meaning of the word. Is that performance assessment? No,
Yes.
right? But if you will ask them to demonstrate the understanding of these specific skills, then it becomes performance assessment.
Yeah, they overlap at times because when you are doing role play, That's performance as well as authenticity, because they are bringing roles from the real life.
Yeah, because this authentic and performance assessment, in its purest sense, they could mean all the same.
Yeah, they
They're the same
overlap
thing.
at many places.
Yeah, but the question is, authentic to what, and what makes this authentic performance assessment? Are you getting the
So basically, if we conduct more performance assessment, then how authentic it is to do with the context.
Yeah,
If the
it should be
context is right,
contextualized.
then
Yeah, it should be contextualized. We need to consider the context of the task itself, and the criteria or the evaluation. So in our case, for example, if we plan to come up with this authentic and performance assessment, then we need to move away from traditional testing. And we can also accommodate this alternative types of assessment. Alternative meaning to say this does not call for testing. Okay, so we'll just ask our students to come or to present something to demonstrate their understanding. But like what I said, I need to emphasize this point that in performance assessment, there should be a specific criteria for evaluation. It's not about imagination. Okay. For performance assessment, the students demonstrate the desired behavior to be measured. In authentic assessment, students not only demonstrate the desired behavior, but also demonstrate in real life context. And this is very true with our students if they go for their co-op training, right? If they go for their co-op training, after developing skills, understanding, then they were asked to come back and present something based on that state in a particular company. Okay, performance assessment requires interpretation of students' work. These are what we call as the rubrics. In our case, I am glad to know that the teacher's level of awareness is kind of high. There were comments saying that this kind of rubric is very difficult to use, and this kind of rubric contains criteria which are not really, these criteria do not match to the task for the students, intended for the students. I said, well, probably if the teachers are not familiar or not well trained about the use of the rubrics, then I expect that there will be negative comments from them. But if this rubric is implemented and students have given, teachers who have all the chances to calibrate the rubric, we need to have teacher moderation. It comes to the system, and then we develop better understanding of the rubric, the criteria, and how to assess our students. Okay, these are features of performance assessment. Topics of high interest. It calls for higher level thinking and processing. Questions leading to related issues or new ideas. Actual tasks and end performances are the goals of instruction. In English, I would like to contextualize this part because in English, we need to consider when we design the performance assessment, the age of our students, grade level, their level of proficiency, familiarity with working with partners or in small groups, familiarity with project or inquiry-based learning. It's not like asking the students to pair. What are your personal encounters or experiences in the classroom if you do pair work? If you will ask two students to work on a particular task. Sometimes one pair could not really submit the they don't understand. That is why when you do pair activity, groupings, then you need to consider also the levels of the students. Examples, another examples here, demonstrating proficiency in using equipment, tools, and materials, like in your very own setting, asking your students to perform, not just basically enumerating the parts of that equipment or tool, using and interpreting maps, writing term papers, critiques, giving speeches. In our English 101, it's a very good combination of authentic performance and authentic assessment and performance assessment. Students are required to do interview. They are asked to come up with their own presentations. group discussion, panel discussion, and other activities. We also have portfolios in our third-year program and other courses. I would like to skip in here because it's the same thing. Okay, the word authentic used with performance assessment means that a task or performances use information, concepts, and skills needed in the outside world or larger world. So meaning to say, this is like what we call as, sometimes in literature, there is what we call as authentic performance assessment. It's a combination of students' understanding of the task, students' demonstration of the task. Resistance to authentic assessment. Do you think there's a chance for us to come up with authentic assessment in our very own setting?
My understanding is that the difference between performance and authentic is not. The authentic assessment measures how much the learner takes or carries with him to the real life, how much he can apply of what he taught. While performance, how much he understood he can jot down on or Instagram or there.
Yeah, it's a clear demonstration of his understanding.
Yeah, if this is the case and we want to apply the authentic assessment, then it has to be framed out in special, and it will be, as you mentioned, will be time consuming.
Yeah, it is. It is time consuming.
Yes.
Yeah, it is time consuming.
Exactly. And not all activities or tasks that are included in the textbook can be applied or included within or in the...
Exactly. You are
Not everything.
You are right. Not all activities in our manuals, in the books, that can be considered authentic, because like what I said, not all students can relate to the exercises in there. So we need to have a critical evaluation or judgment of these activities. These should be contextualized to their very own setting for us to come up with this type of authenticity or authentic assessment. Okay. What are our future directions now? For those who are here today, I would like to suggest that we can develop with a multiple assessment because these are necessary. We can also make use of these alternative assessments instead of the traditional type of evaluating our students. Multiple choice, 40 items or 30 items. True or false, 15 items, and other things. And we need to develop our syllabus, especially testing, the writing of the questions, content validity, that all these questions should reflect the true behavior that is being measured for our students, the scoring, and the assessment itself. The context of this assessment here in my presentation is when we give feedback to our students of their performances inside the class. If we use performance assessment, explain to the students the criteria, and we need to prepare them so that they will have a better understanding of their performances inside the classroom. That ends my presentation, A Tale of Two Scales. Do you have any questions or clarification?
Thank you very much.
I will give you examples from
Do you have
yeah.
Doctor, can we have this file?
Yeah, sure.